In the vast, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where the relentless tide of history crashed against the shores of human ambition, there once unfolded a saga so extraordinary, so improbable, that it echoes through the annals of naval warfare like a whispered legend. Imagine a time when the fate of empires hinged on the silent ballet of steel behemoths lurking beneath the waves, and the deadly dance of predator and prey played out in the unforgiving deep. This isn't merely a recounting of dates and destroyers. It's a profound journey into the very essence of human ingenuity, unwavering courage, and the devastating power of innovation forged in the crucible of global conflict. This is the story of the USS England, a destroyer escort, a vessel far from the titanic battleships and aircraft carriers that dominated headlines, yet one that carved an indelible mark upon history. In a mere 12 days, a blink of an eye in the grand sweep of World War II, this single ship achieved what no other before or since has accomplished: the systematic hunting down and destruction of 6 enemy submarines. 6 silent hunters, vanished beneath the waves, their missions ended, their crews lost, all at the hands of one unassuming American warship. It was a record that stunned even the hardened veterans of the Pacific Fleet, a testament not just to technological prowess, but to the intricate web of human intelligence, tactical brilliance, and sheer, bloody-minded determination. The year was 1944. The war in the Pacific had raged for over 2 years, a brutal, island-hopping struggle for supremacy. The early triumphs of the Japanese Empire had faded, replaced by a grim, tenacious American advance. Yet the Japanese Imperial Navy, though battered, was far from broken. Their submarines, though dwindling in number and facing increasingly sophisticated Allied anti-submarine warfare, remained a formidable threat, a shadowy vanguard capable of striking deep into American supply lines and reconnaissance efforts. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation, a strategic chess match where every move, every intercepted whisper across the airwaves could alter the course of nations. Our story, however, doesn't begin with the thunderous roar of naval guns or the dramatic splash of depth charges. It starts in the quiet, almost monastic solitude of a nondescript building nestled within the bustling confines of Pearl Harbor. Here, miles from the front lines, a different kind of war was being fought. A war of the mind, a battle of wits against an unseen enemy. This was the domain of the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, or FUPAX, the brilliant successor to the legendary Station Hypo, which had famously broken Japanese codes before the pivotal Battle of Midway. On May 13, 1944, within those windowless rooms, surrounded by clattering IBM tabulating machines and mountains of seemingly indecipherable paper, American cryptanalysts intercepted a seemingly routine Japanese radio transmission. It was a message from a submarine, the I-16, to the commander of Japanese Submarine Division 7. On the surface, it conveyed mundane operational details: an estimated time of arrival off Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, scheduled for 2,200 hours on May 22nd. To an untrained eye, it was just another snippet of military bureaucracy. But to the keen, highly trained minds of the American intelligence officers, it was a golden thread, a critical piece of a colossal puzzle, offering an unprecedented opportunity to strike at the very heart of Japan's underwater fleet. The ability to pluck such a critical piece of information from the vast static of wartime communications was not an accident. It was the culmination of years of relentless, painstaking labor. Since the earliest, darkest days of the war, brilliant teams of mathematicians, linguists, and puzzle solvers had toiled in absolute secrecy, their lives dedicated to cracking the intricate Japanese naval codes, particularly the formidable JN-25. Their work was an intellectual marathon, requiring not just raw computational power, but an intuitive grasp of linguistics, cultural nuances, and the often idiosyncratic patterns of human communication. Imagine the pressure, the sheer mental exhaustion, as they painstakingly pieced together fragmented messages, searching for the elusive cribs, known plaintext fragments, that could unlock entire codebooks. These unsung heroes, working in conditions of almost monastic isolation, had already contributed to American victories at Midway, where their foreknowledge of Japanese plans had turned the tide, and in the Solomon Islands. But never before had such direct, actionable, decoded intelligence been used with such devastating effectiveness in anti-submarine warfare. This wasn't just about knowing where the enemy was. It was about knowing exactly where they were going to be, a predictive power that bordered on prescience, granting an almost unfair advantage in a war where surprise was paramount. Once decoded, this precious intelligence was immediately transmitted through secure channels, a digital whisper across the vast Pacific, reaching Commander Hamilton Haines. Haines, a battle-hardened veteran of destroyer warfare, commanded Escort Division 39, stationed at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. He wasn't new to the grim business of hunting submarines. He had cut his teeth battling German U-boats in the treacherous waters of the Atlantic. His experience, his ingrained understanding of submarine tactics, and his unyielding resolve would prove invaluable in the coming engagement. Haines wasted no time. The decrypted message was a ticking clock. He moved with swift, decisive action, forming a 3-ship hunter-killer task group, selecting the best anti-submarine vessels at his disposal for this critical mission. These weren't the colossal battleships or the fast, glamorous fleet carriers. These were the workhorses, the unsung heroes of naval warfare. 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts. Leading this specialized wolf pack was the USS George, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Fred W. Just. Alongside her sailed the USS Rabbi, led by Lieutenant Commander James Scott. And then there was the USS England, DE 635, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Walton Barclay Pendleton, temporarily detached from Escort Division 40 to join this urgent, high-stakes hunt. All 3 ships departed Purvis Bay on Florida Island on May 18, 1944, with Commander Haines himself embarked aboard the George, taking the reins as the officer in tactical command. The selection of these specific ships and their crews was no accident. Each had been purpose-built and specifically equipped for anti-submarine warfare. Their crews had spent months, not years, but intense, focused months, perfecting their skills in the dangerous submarine-infested waters around the Solomon Islands. They had trained together, developed a seamless teamwork, and established communication protocols that transcended mere orders, evolving into an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and intentions. Though many of these sailors were young, some barely out of their teens, and relatively green in combat experience, they had been drilled relentlessly in every aspect of ASW: sonar operation, attack procedures, damage control. This rigorous preparation, this relentless pursuit of perfection in a deadly craft, would soon pay dividends far beyond anyone's wildest imagination. But this particular submarine hunt, triggered by a single intercepted message, was merely a ripple in a much larger, more ominous strategic picture unfurling across the Pacific. On that very same day, the task force departed. Additional radio intelligence revealed a deeply disturbing development. The Japanese were establishing a massive scouting line of 7 submarines, designated the NA Line. This picket line stretched hundreds of miles, a silent barrier between the Admiralty Islands north of New Guinea and Truk in the Caroline Islands, positioned directly across the anticipated route of American carriers destined for their next major operation. The Japanese High Command, reeling from previous losses but ever tenacious, was bracing for new Allied landings. The question wasn't if, but where. Would it be the Marianas, the Western Caroline Islands, or the western end of New Guinea? This strategic uncertainty was a reflection of the desperate situation facing the Imperial Navy in mid-1944, with their once mighty carrier force decimated and their sprawling island bases increasingly isolated by the relentless Allied advance. Submarines represented one of the few remaining tools for gathering vital intelligence, and, critically, for disrupting American operations. The NA Line was conceived as an early warning system, a fragile tripwire designed to buy the Japanese fleet precious time. Time to respond, time to reposition, time to perhaps, just perhaps, turn the tide. Each submarine was assigned a specific, rigid patrol area with orders to remain on station and report any American naval movements. It was a strategy born of necessity, but one tragically flawed. This rigid nature, so utterly different from the flexible, adaptive patrol areas employed by American submarines, would prove to be a fatal vulnerability in the Japanese plan. It was a strategic straitjacket, a self-imposed tactical limitation that gifted their enemies an unforeseen advantage. Japanese strategic planners, analyzing recent American carrier strikes supporting General Douglas MacArthur's westward advance along New Guinea's northern coast, concluded that western New Guinea was the most probable target. In response, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, issued orders for Operation A-Go. This was to be the decisive naval battle, the grand, desperate gamble that would halt the American advance and protect Japan's inner defense perimeter, an area encompassing the Marianas, Western Caroline Islands, and Western New Guinea. The execution of Operation A-Go, however, would ultimately lead to one of the most catastrophic Japanese defeats of the war, an engagement history would remember as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and, infamously, the Marianas Turkey Shoot. In June 1944, less than a month after the England's incredible run, Japan would lose 3 aircraft carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and aircraft, effectively crippling its naval air arm for the remainder of the conflict. The planning for Operation A-Go, ambitious as it was, inadvertently revealed the fundamental weaknesses plaguing Japanese naval strategy by 1944. The devastating loss of experienced pilots at Midway, the Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz had never been fully addressed. The new generation of aviators, rushed through abbreviated training programs, simply lacked the skill, the tactical acumen, and the combat experience of their predecessors. This wasn't merely a numerical deficit. It was a qualitative chasm that widened with each passing month. Meanwhile, on the American side, pilot training had become a massive industrial enterprise, a relentless conveyor belt churning out thousands of highly trained combat-ready aviators. The technological gap was widening too, and dramatically so. American fighters, like the F-6F Hellcat, significantly outperformed their Japanese counterparts in terms of speed, climb, and firepower, and American ships bristled with radar-directed anti-aircraft guns, turning attacks against them into increasingly suicidal endeavors for Japanese pilots. To support Operation A-Go, Vice Admiral Takagi Takeo, commander of the Japanese 6th Fleet submarines, directed submarines from the 7th Submarine Squadron to establish the NA scouting line. Takagi was a veteran submarine commander, a man who had witnessed firsthand the steady, tragic deterioration of Japan's once proud underwater fleet. At the war's outset, Japanese submarines had been among the best in the world, boasting highly trained crews and excellent torpedoes, but the attrition had been heavy. Losses mounted, and replacement crews, though courageous, often lacked the skill and irreplaceable experience of those who had gone before. Moreover, Japanese submarine doctrine, which emphasized attacks on warships rather than the more strategically impactful merchant vessels, had proven fatally flawed. While American submarines were relentlessly strangling Japan's vital supply lines, Japanese submarines were being hunted to extinction, with tragically little to show for their immense sacrifice. In a decision that would prove profoundly fatal, 7 Japanese submarines were assigned to specific, fixed positions along this NA line. This was a critical contrast to the flexible operating areas typically afforded to American submarines, which allowed their commanders to adapt to changing circumstances and evade detection. This rigid positioning, dictated by a top-down command structure, became a critical vulnerability, a predictable pattern that intelligence could exploit, and a death trap for the valiant men who manned these boats. The chain of events that would seal the fate of these submarines began with a seemingly routine Japanese interception. Japanese forces had detected an American aircraft's contact report on one of their own submarines, the RO-104. In response, the Japanese command promptly radioed orders to the entire NA line. Shift their positions 60 nautical miles to the southeast, transmitting precise coordinates for each submarine's new station. This seemingly innocuous operational message, a digital repositioning order, was a gift to American intelligence. It was immediately intercepted by American radio intelligence, a triumph of constant vigilance and technical superiority. The message was then forwarded to the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific Ocean area, where cryptanalysts worked feverishly, a race against time, to break out the new coordinates. The process was far from simple. It required not just breaking the code, but an intimate understanding of the Japanese Navy's complex coordinate system and its unique operational procedures. It was a mental chess game, dissecting layers of encryption and naval parlance. But the American code breakers, their skills honed by years of relentless practice, succeeded. They successfully extracted the precise positions of each submarine in the NA line. For the first time in the Pacific War, this ultra-secret intelligence, gleaned from the enemy's own communications, would be sanitized and shared directly with the anti-submarine forces on the front lines, granting them an unprecedented, almost unbelievable advantage in hunting enemy submarines. The intelligence proved remarkably accurate. In almost every case, the Japanese submarines would be found within 50 nautical miles, and often much closer, to exactly where the decoded messages indicated they would be. The decision to share this intelligence with tactical units, however, was not taken lightly. It represented a significant, calculated risk. If the Japanese realized their codes were compromised, they might change them, depriving the Allies of a crucial, hard-won advantage that had cost years of effort and untold intellectual resources. To mitigate this risk, elaborate precautions were taken to disguise the true source of the intelligence. Cover stories were meticulously prepared, attributing the submarine discoveries to seemingly routine aerial reconnaissance or chance encounters during routine patrols. The crews of the destroyer escorts were informed that they were acting on aerial sighting reports, never knowing that their incredible successes were enabled by one of the war's most closely guarded secrets: a silent, invisible hand guiding them to their prey. The 3 destroyer escorts of the hunter-killer group were all relatively new Buckley-class vessels, part of a massive wartime construction program that aimed to quickly bolster Allied anti-submarine capabilities. This ambitious program would eventually churn out 124 of these specialized warships, with 148 completed, and some even serving with the British Royal Navy under the Lend-Lease Act. The Buckley class represented a pragmatic compromise between raw capability and the urgent demands of mass production. They were smaller, less expensive, and quicker to build than fleet destroyers, allowing them to be constructed rapidly in commercial shipyards by workers who, while patriotic, often had limited shipbuilding experience. Yet, despite their more modest size, they packed enough firepower and specialized anti-submarine equipment to be exceptionally deadly submarine hunters. Their diesel-electric propulsion system, while limiting their top speed, endowed them with exceptional range and the critical ability to operate for extended periods without needing to refuel, a vital asset in the vast distances of the Pacific. Each of these ships carried a weight of honor, named to commemorate a fallen hero, carrying forward the legacy of American servicemen who had made the ultimate sacrifice. This profound naming tradition served not just as a memorial to the dead, but as a powerful, unspoken inspiration to the living. The crews of these vessels understood that they sailed under the names of heroes, men who had embodied courage and duty. This knowledge instilled in them a heightened sense of purpose and determination, a drive that transcended normal military obligation. The USS George bore the name of Seaman Second Class Eugene F. George, a young sailor posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for his incredible heroism. On November 12, 1942, during the brutal naval battle of Guadalcanal, one of the most savage surface engagements of the war, fought at point-blank range in the absolute darkness, George served as an anti-aircraft gunner aboard the heavy cruiser USS San Francisco. Amidst the chaos of exploding shells and crisscrossing gunfire, a damaged Japanese G-4M Betty bomber, already engulfed in flames from San Francisco's anti-aircraft fire, deliberately aimed for the cruiser's gun positions in a desperate, suicidal attack. Seaman George and his fellow gunners, fully aware of their impending doom, stood their ground. They continued to fire at the rapidly approaching aircraft until the very moment of impact. The bomber crashed into San Francisco's bridge structure, killing Admiral Daniel Callahan and his staff. But George and his gun crew never wavered. Their unwavering courage in the face of certain death earned George and several other San Francisco gunners who died at their posts that day the Navy Cross, their names forever enshrined in the ships that bore their memory. The USS Rabbi was named for Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby, a pioneer in anti-submarine warfare. He had earned the Navy Cross during World War I, commanding transatlantic convoy operations, including the very first convoy to successfully cross the Atlantic under American escort. Rabi's experience had been instrumental in proving that convoys, when properly escorted and managed, could effectively defeat the submarine menace. He developed many of the tactics and procedures that were still in use decades later. Tragically, Admiral Raby was killed in an automobile accident in 1934 while serving as commandant of the Charleston Naval District. Yet, his enduring legacy of protecting merchant shipping, the very lifelines of nations, would live on through the vessel that bore his name, a symbol of tireless vigilance against the unseen threat from below. And then there was the USS England, carrying perhaps the most poignant history of all. She was named for Ensign John Charles England, a young naval officer whose life was tragically cut short during the infamous Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Ensign England, just 4 days shy of his 21st birthday, had volunteered to work in the USS Oklahoma's radio room that fateful morning, selflessly trading shifts with a friend so the other man could spend more precious time with his family, who had just arrived in Hawaii. England himself was eagerly awaiting the arrival of his own wife and their 3-week-old daughter, whom he had never even seen. When Japanese torpedoes slammed into the battleship and she began her terrifying, irreversible capsizing, Ensign England initially managed to escape to the deck. The scene that greeted him was one of unimaginable chaos and horror. The Oklahoma was rolling over, trapping hundreds of men inside her rapidly flooding hull. Oil-covered sailors struggled in the water, some tragically aflame, while Japanese aircraft mercilessly strafed survivors. But in that moment of hellish survival, England's thoughts were not of himself. He remembered the men still trapped in the radio room below. He made a fateful, heroic decision. He returned to the sinking ship's interior. 3 times he descended into the capsizing battleship, each time successfully guiding a trapped sailor to safety, navigating through passages that were rapidly filling with water and thick, black oil. The ship's electrical system had failed, plunging the interior into absolute darkness. England had to navigate by touch and memory, fighting against rushing water, suffocating oil, and the ship's increasing, terrifying list. On his 4th attempt to rescue his shipmates, Ensign England disappeared into the Oklahoma's flooding compartments and was never seen again. He was one of 429 officers and men who perished aboard Oklahoma that day. His personal sacrifice a stark emblem of the heroism that emerged amidst the devastation. The tragedy of the USS Oklahoma was one of the most horrific of Pearl Harbor. As the ship capsized, hundreds of men were trapped in air pockets within her hull. For days after the attack, salvage workers could hear tapping from inside the ship, a desperate, heartbreaking rhythm as trapped sailors signaled for help. Heroic efforts were made to cut through the hull and rescue survivors, and 32 men were eventually saved in a harrowing operation. But for most, including Ensign England, there would be no rescue. Initially buried among the unknown casualties at Punchbowl National Cemetery in Hawaii, Ensign England's remains would not be identified until 2016, a testament to the relentless march of forensic science, when advances in DNA technology finally allowed him to be returned home to Colorado Springs, where he was reinterred next to his parents. Though he received only a Purple Heart for his ultimate sacrifice, his extraordinary heroism in repeatedly risking and ultimately giving his life to save others would be commemorated through not 1, but 2 warships bearing his name: the destroyer escort DE-635 and the later guided missile cruiser CG-22. His story, a poignant blend of selflessness and ultimate sacrifice, imbued the USS England with a spirit of duty and quiet heroism that undoubtedly resonated with its crew. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts were not designed for grand surface engagements. They were purpose-built submarine hunters. Their armaments reflected this specialization. 3 3-inch guns for defense against aircraft and minor surface craft, but deliberately kept light to save weight and cost. The true striking power of these ships lay in their dedicated anti-submarine armament. Their arsenal included 1 triple bank of 21-inch torpedoes, 2 stern-mounted depth charge racks for traditional attacks, 8 K-gun depth charge projectors that could hurl charges to either side of the ship, creating a wider spread. But most importantly, and most decisively, they were equipped with 1 Mark X Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. It was this last weapon that would prove to be the game-changer, the innovative edge that transformed anti-submarine warfare. The development of specialized anti-submarine vessels like the Buckley class was a direct, hard-learned lesson from the desperate crucible of the Battle of the Atlantic. There, German U-boats had come perilously close to severing Britain's vital lifelines, a relentless campaign that brought the island nation to the brink of starvation and defeat. The Allies had learned that defeating the submarine menace required not just better weapons, but also specialized platforms, ships meticulously optimized for the singular, demanding task of hunting and killing submarines. These ships needed long range to escort convoys across vast, treacherous ocean distances, excellent seakeeping abilities to operate effectively in rough, unpredictable weather, and, crucially, sophisticated detection equipment to find submerged submarines lurking silently below. The Buckley class ingeniously incorporated all these critical requirements into a compact, effective package that could be mass-produced in American shipyards with unprecedented speed. The Hedgehog, however, represented a genuine revolution in anti-submarine warfare. It addressed fundamental flaws that had plagued submarine hunters since World War I, problems that had led to frustratingly low kill rates and countless escapes. Developed by the British Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development in 1941, born of desperate necessity during Britain's darkest hours when U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced, the Hedgehog had only recently become widely available to American forces in late 1943. Its deployment was a strategic shift, offering a new, far more lethal approach. The weapon itself consisted of 24 projectiles, arranged in 6 rows of 4, mounted on a trainable platform that could launch them in an elliptical pattern 200 to 300 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Each projectile was a formidable piece of ordnance, weighing 65 pounds with a 35-pound charge of TNT or Torpex explosive. The projectiles would be fired in a carefully timed sequence, ensuring that all 24 would impact the water almost simultaneously, creating a deadly pattern approximately 140 feet by 120 feet in area. The weapon's somewhat quirky name, Hedgehog, came from its appearance when loaded, with the spigot mortars protruding from the launcher resembling the spines of the small defensive mammal. But there was nothing small or defensive about the weapon's impact on naval warfare. It represented a fundamental, paradigm-shifting change in how surface ships attacked submarines, solving problems that had bedeviled naval tacticians for decades. What made the Hedgehog truly revolutionary was its use of contact-fused warheads. This was the critical distinction. Unlike traditional depth charges, which detonated at preset depths using hydrostatic fuses, irrespective of whether they were near a submarine or not, Each Hedgehog projectile would only explode on direct physical contact with a solid object, in this case, the hull of a submarine. This seemingly simple, yet profoundly different principle provided several crucial advantages that would prove decisive in the battles ahead. Firstly, the success or failure of an attack was immediately and unequivocally apparent. If one or more projectiles hit a submarine, there would be explosions, sharp, distinct cracks transmitted through the water. If all missed, there would be a disconcerting silence, broken only by the splashes of the projectiles entering the water. Ship commanders no longer had to endure agonizing minutes, sometimes 20 minutes or more, scanning the surface for telltale oil slicks or debris to determine if their attack had succeeded. This immediate feedback was invaluable, saving precious time and psychological strain. Moreover, the Hedgehog could be reloaded in approximately 3 minutes, allowing for rapid follow-up attacks if the first salvo missed. This quick reload time was absolutely critical. Submarines that survived the initial attack often escaped during the long reload times required for traditional depth charge attacks, disappearing into the vastness of the ocean. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly from a tactical perspective, the Hedgehog solved the persistent problem of sonar blindness that had long plagued anti-submarine forces. Traditional depth charges, by their very nature, created massive underwater explosions, whether they hit their target or not. These detonations would effectively deafen the attacking ship's sonar for many minutes, generating a maelstrom of acoustic disturbances that could take up to 15 minutes to dissipate. During this period of acoustic blindness, submarines could often escape undetected, using the chaos as cover. The concussion from depth charges also created a swirling barrier of turbulent water and air bubbles that reflected sonar pulses erratically, making accurate tracking impossible. With the Hedgehog, if the projectiles missed, there were no explosions to disturb the water. This allowed the attacking ship to maintain continuous sonar contact, providing an unbroken stream of data and enabling them to immediately set up for another, more refined attack. The psychological dynamics were also starkly different. While depth charges created a terrifying barrage of explosions that could inflict psychological damage on submarine crews, even when they missed, potentially forcing submarines to surface or surrender, the Hedgehog was a silent killer. Submarines had virtually no warning that an attack was underway until the projectiles were already in the water, taking about 7 seconds to sink to 200 feet. This gave submarine commanders precious little time, if any, to take evasive action. With traditional stern-dropped depth charges, experienced submarine captains could calculate when they entered the attacking ship's minimum sonar detection range and execute sharp, violent, evasive maneuvers to avoid the charges being rolled off the stern. Some submarine commanders had become so skilled at this deadly game of cat and mouse that they could predict almost exactly when depth charges would explode and maneuver accordingly. The Hedgehog eliminated this tactical option entirely, changing the rules of engagement in a brutal, decisive way. Statistics from the war would later prove the Hedgehog's devastating effectiveness. British analysis showed that during World War II, an average of 60 traditional depth charge attacks were required to sink a single submarine. In the early war period, this ratio was even worse, sometimes over 100 attacks per kill, highlighting the immense difficulty of the task. With the Hedgehog, this ratio improved dramatically, a truly revolutionary leap, to approximately 1 submarine sunk for every 5 to 6 attacks, a tenfold improvement in lethality. Although each Hedgehog projectile carried less explosive power than a standard depth charge, a direct hit from even a single projectile was usually sufficient to breach a submarine's pressure hull and send it irrevocably to the bottom. The contact explosion, directly against the hull, was far more destructive than the dispersed pressure wave from a near-miss depth charge explosion, as the hull itself helped contain and focus the explosive force inward, magnifying its destructive power. The submarine I-16, the vessel whose intercepted message had triggered this entire hunt, was no ordinary vessel. She was a veteran, a ghost of Japan's early war triumphs, with a distinguished, if ultimately tragic, combat record spanning 9 war patrols. A Type C-1 submarine, one of the largest in the Japanese fleet, I-16 was a formidable craft, 358 feet long and displacing 3,161 tons submerged. She was specially equipped to carry a Type A midget submarine mounted on her deck, a testament to Japanese innovation and their penchant for audacious, if often costly, special operations. It was I-16 that had earned a unique, if controversial, place in history by launching the very first midget submarine attack of the Pacific War. The story of I-16's role at Pearl Harbor vividly illustrated both the innovative spirit and the ultimate futility of Japanese naval special operations. The midget submarine program had been developed in great secrecy, with the tiny, 2-man craft intended to penetrate enemy harbors and deliver devastating torpedo attacks from within. 5 mother submarines, including I-16, had carried these miniature subs to Pearl Harbor, launching them in the pre-dawn hours of December 7, 1941, hours before the main air attack. Under the command of Lieutenant Junior Grade Yokoyama Masaharu, I-16's midget submarine had been launched at Aohiro 42, attempting to penetrate the harbor defenses and attack American warships. The fate of these midget submarines, however, revealed the stark gap between Japanese ambition and the brutal reality of naval warfare. Though Yokoyama's craft never returned, and his fate remained unknown for decades, I-16 received radio transmissions believed to be from his midget sub on the afternoon of December 7th, reporting a successful attack, and another early on December 8th indicating the craft could not navigate. Post-war analysis, however, suggested that none of the midget submarines successfully attacked American ships at Pearl Harbor. One was sunk by the destroyer USS Ward in the war's opening shots. Another was destroyed inside the harbor by USS Monaghan. One ran aground, and its sole survivor became America's first Japanese prisoner of war. And 2 simply vanished. None of the 5 midget submarines launched that day returned to their motherships, and of the 10 crewmen, only 1 survived the war as a prisoner. 6 months later, on May 30th, 1942, I-16 achieved what had eluded her at Pearl Harbor, a successful midget submarine attack. Operating in the Indian Ocean against British forces at Diego Suarez, Madagascar, I-16 launched another midget submarine, this one commanded by Ensign Iwas Katsusuke. This midget sub successfully penetrated the British anchorage and fired its torpedoes, scoring a critical hit on the British battleship HMS Ramillies that caused severe damage. The 29,150-ton battleship, a veteran of World War I, took on 800 tons of water and was nearly lost. Though Ramillies survived thanks to excellent damage control and would go on to bombard German positions during D-Day, the attack demonstrated I-16's capability for launching devastating surprise attacks. The midget submarine also sank the tanker British Loyalty before being lost with its crew. This success at Madagascar represented the high watermark of Japanese midget submarine operations, proving the concept could work under the right circumstances, but also tragically highlighting the extreme danger and typically one-way nature of such missions. During the brutal Guadalcanal campaign, I-16 conducted multiple dangerous resupply runs to isolated Japanese garrisons, becoming part of the infamous Tokyo Express, the desperate effort to supply Japanese forces in the Solomon Islands by submarine after surface ships could no longer safely make the journey. On November 28, 1942, she launched another midget sub, H-10, which successfully torpedoed the American cargo ship USS Alchaiba, forcing her to beach herself to avoid sinking. Alchaiba, loaded with aviation fuel and ammunition, burned for days, but was eventually salvaged. P-16 subsequently covered the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal in early 1943 and continued supply runs to bypassed garrisons in New Guinea. She had even survived an air attack in December 1943 that caused light damage, a testament to her crew's resilience and her robust construction. But her luck, a precious commodity in wartime, was about to run out. The supply missions that I-16 and her sisters undertook were a stark, poignant symbol of the deteriorating Japanese strategic position. Once proud fleet submarines, designed for offensive operations and engaging enemy warships, were reduced to carrying bags of rice and medical supplies to starving garrisons on bypassed islands. Each mission meant running a gauntlet of increasingly effective American aircraft and warships, often for the dubious reward of delivering a few tons of supplies to troops who were ultimately doomed by the relentless American advance. It was a terrible waste of scarce submarines and their highly trained crews, a grim testament to a naval command's code of honor that demanded no garrison be abandoned while any means of supply remained, no matter how futile. On May 14, 1944, I-16 departed Truk Lagoon under the command of Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi Yoshitaka, her hold filled with a cargo of rice in 75-pound rubber bags, intended for the desperately starving Japanese garrison at Buen on Bougainville. The garrison there had been bypassed by American forces since November 1943, slowly being starved into submission. Conditions had become utterly desperate. Men were dying of starvation and disease daily, and grim incidents of cannibalism had even been reported. It was a hellish existence, and the submarine was their only lifeline. But I-16's departure transmission, a routine communication of her mission, intercepted and meticulously decoded by American intelligence, had inadvertently sealed her fate. The 3 American destroyer escorts were already converging on her predicted position, a silent, unseen net closing in. On the afternoon of May 19, 1944, the intelligence was confirmed. An Allied reconnaissance aircraft, a consolidated PBY Catalina from a Navy patrol squadron, spotted I-16 on the surface north of Bougainville, a tiny speck against the vast ocean. The submarine was running on the surface, a necessary evil to recharge her batteries and make better speed toward her destination. Japanese submarines of this period suffered from relatively weak batteries and slow underwater speeds, forcing them to spend considerable, dangerous time on the surface, where they were acutely vulnerable to detection by aircraft and radar-equipped warships. The 3 destroyer escorts immediately sprang into action. They formed a line abreast, a deadly, coordinated formation, and commenced a systematic sonar sweep of the area. This formation, with ships precisely spaced at optimal sonar detection intervals, created an acoustic net that few submarines could hope to escape. At 13:35 hours, England's sonar operator, a young sailor from Iowa who had never seen the ocean before joining the Navy, reported a solid contact with a submerged submarine. The distinctive, chilling ping of the sonar return indicated a solid object at a range of 1,350 yards. The hunt was on. The invisible dance of death had begun. Dr. 16 immediately commenced standard Japanese submarine evasion tactics, techniques refined through brutal experience. Radical changes in depth and direction, sudden speed changes, and sharp turns designed to throw off the attacking ship's targeting solution. These tactics had saved many submarines from destruction. Japanese submarine commanders were trained to think three-dimensionally, using the entire water column as well as course changes to evade attackers. Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi was fighting for his life and the lives of his 106 crew members, the fate of all hanging in the balance. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton brought England in for her first attack run, a tense, meticulously choreographed approach. It required precise coordination. The sonar operators maintaining fragile contact, the plotting team frantically calculating the target's course and speed, and the Hedgehog crew preparing their unique weapon. But the first Hedgehog salvo missed as I-16 successfully evaded, diving deep and turning sharply at the last moment. The second attack also failed to connect. I-16 was using every trick in the book, a desperate masterclass in survival, releasing bubbles to create false sonar targets, changing depth rapidly to throw off range calculations, and executing radical course changes that pushed the submarine's hull to its structural limits. On the third attack, England's Hedgehog scored a single hit. The explosion would have been devastating inside the submarine. A concussive shock wave throwing men against bulkheads, shattering light bulbs, potentially causing localized flooding. But the big submarine's strong hull absorbed the damage, and her valiant crew managed to maintain control, continuing their desperate evasion maneuvers. Japanese damage control training was excellent, and submarine crews were drilled relentlessly in dealing with battle damage. Pendleton, however, demonstrated remarkable persistence and tactical skill. He set up for a fourth attack, which again missed the violently maneuvering submarine. By now, the hunt had been going on for over an hour. The tension aboard England was palpable, a heavy cloak of anticipation and frustration. The crew knew they had a submarine trapped, but couldn't deliver the killing blow. In the plotting room, officers worked frantically to predict I-16's next move, their faces etched with concentration. The sonar operators strained to maintain contact as the submarine dove deeper, approaching the treacherous thermal layers where temperature differences in the water could hide it from sonar, making it vanish like a ghost. But on the fifth attack run, England's tenacious Hedgehog crew had learned from their previous attempts. They had been meticulously observing I-16's evasion tactics, noticing subtle patterns, a tendency to turn to port when diving, a preference for certain depth bands, a momentary hesitation before a radical change. They were adapting, learning their prey's habits. At 14:35 hours, just over an hour into the hunt, multiple projectiles found their mark. The ocean erupted. The massive, underwater explosion that followed was so powerful, it literally lifted England's stern completely out of the water, throwing men to the deck and rattling the entire ship from stem to stern. The explosion was heard and felt on the other destroyer escorts thousands of yards away, a visceral testament to the destructive force unleashed. 20 minutes later, the grim evidence began rising to the surface. Oil and debris, unmistakable proof that I-16 had been destroyed. Rice bags, pieces of wood, cork insulation, and other flotsam emerged from the depths. Among the debris were personal effects: a sailor's cap, pages from a Japanese book, a wooden sandal, poignant, heartbreaking reminders of the human cost of war. The lives irrevocably intertwined with the steel behemoth now resting on the ocean floor. The submarine that had launched the first attack at Pearl Harbor was gone, taking all 107 officers and men, including Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi, to their deaths. They had died in the service of a lost cause, carrying rice to a garrison that would surrender anyway when the war finally ended. Meanwhile, the 7 submarines of the NA line had departed Saipan around May 17, 1944, to take up their assigned positions. Their departure had been marked by a solemn ceremony attended by Vice Admiral Takagi himself, who exhorted the submarine commanders to do their duty for the Emperor. Each captain received a ceremonial cup of sake and a white headband inscribed with patriotic slogans, symbols of their unwavering commitment. They knew, deep in their hearts, that the odds against their survival were monumentally high. American anti-submarine capabilities had improved dramatically since the war's early, chaotic days. All 7 of these submarines were RO-class boats, type RO-100 submarines, much smaller and less formidable than the I-16. Originally designed for coastal defense, these 760-ton boats were armed with 4 torpedo tubes in the bow, carrying 8 torpedoes total, plus a single 76mm deck gun. Their design reflected a pre-war Japanese naval thinking that emphasized quality over quantity, resulting in submarines that were well built but too few in number, and lacking the mass production advantages that made American submarines so effective. Most were equipped with rudimentary Type 22 radar detectors, but crucially, they lacked radar themselves, making them poorly suited for the reconnaissance mission they had been assigned. Their job was to spot American carrier forces and report their movements. But without radar, they would be forced to spend dangerous amounts of time on the surface, relying on visual lookouts, a perilous endeavor in an ocean increasingly dominated by Allied air and surface patrols. Of the 20 type RO-100 submarines Japan would build during the war, a chilling statistic, not a single one would survive to see the final surrender. The first submarine of the NA line to meet its fate was RO-106. This submarine had already compiled a notable war record. On July 18, 1943, during operations in the Solomon Islands, RO-106 had torpedoed the American tank landing ship LST-342 in Blanche Channel near New Georgia. The torpedo detonated the LST's ammunition stores, causing a catastrophic explosion that blew the ship in half. The stern section sank immediately, while the forward section, a mangled hulk, remained afloat long enough to be towed to shore. Among the 121 men killed were the ship's entire mess division of African-American stewards and cooks, as well as the renowned artist Lieutenant Commander McClelland Barclay, who had created many of the war's most famous recruiting posters before volunteering for combat duty. RO-106 had even survived serious damage from airdropped depth charges in October 1943, a testament to her crew's tenacity, returning to service after months of painstaking repairs. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 22, 1944, at 0350 hours, Georgia's radar operator detected a surface contact that proved to be RO-106. The submarine was running on the surface, a necessary but dangerous operation, recharging her batteries under the cover of darkness. This left submarines acutely vulnerable to radar-equipped enemies. George illuminated the submarine with a powerful 24-inch searchlight, catching her completely by surprise. Her E-27 radar detector, a critical piece of defensive equipment, had failed to function, leaving her blind to the approaching destroyer escort. The powerful beam of light would have been blinding to the submarine's bridge watch, who had been using night vision to scan for enemies. Despite the surprise, RO-106's crew reacted with incredible speed, crash diving beneath the surface before George could bring her guns to bear. The submarine's officer of the deck ordered an emergency dive, and within seconds the bridge was cleared, and the submarine was heading under. The dive took less than 40 seconds, well within Japanese Navy standards, a testament to their training, but it wasn't fast enough to completely escape. George launched a hedgehog attack at Oahu, but missed the frantically evading submarine. At 0:25, England gained sonar contact on RO-106 as she attempted to escape. The submarine was making turns for 8 knots, zigzagging violently while changing depth, a desperate dance of evasion. England's first hedgehog attack missed, but then the submarine made what may have been a fatal tactical error. RO-106 reversed course and turned bow on to England, possibly attempting to fire torpedoes at her attacker. This maneuver, however, presented a perfect target for the hedgehog, a weapon designed to fire ahead of the ship, unlike the stern-dropped depth charges of old. Not understanding how this new weapon system worked, the submarine commander had inadvertently positioned his boat directly in the hedgehog's kill zone, a tragic miscalculation. England's second attack scored at least 3 direct hits. The explosions would have been catastrophic inside the submarine. The hull breached in multiple places, water rushing in at tremendous pressure, electrical systems shorting out in showers of sparks and arcs. The submarine broke up immediately, her pressure hull collapsing as she plunged toward the ocean floor, unable to withstand the focused force of the explosions. RO-106 was lost with all 49 hands. The entire action, from first radar contact to the submarine's destruction, had taken just 36 minutes. A chilling demonstration of the hedgehog's swift lethality. The next day brought another success, a relentless continuation of the hunt. RO-104, under the command of Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi, had spent most of her previous patrols in the frigid, unforgiving waters of the North Pacific and Aleutian Islands, a stark, brutal contrast to the tropical warmth where she now hunted. The North Pacific had been a secondary theater for Japanese submarines, used mainly for reconnaissance and occasional attacks on the critical supply line between the United States and the Soviet Union. During operations in the Solomons in late 1943, RO-104 had performed a remarkable rescue mission. On November 3, 1943, she saved 75 survivors of the Japanese light cruiser Suzuya after she was sunk in a night surface action with American cruisers during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. The rescue had been performed under incredibly dangerous conditions, with American aircraft patrolling overhead and the constant threat of discovery by American warships. Among those rescued was Rear Admiral Baron Matsuji Ijuin, commander of Japanese Destroyer Squadron 3, whose survival was considered vital to the Imperial Navy. On May 23, 1944, at 06:04 hours, an Allied aircraft spotted RO-104 on the surface approximately 250 nautical miles north-northwest of Kavieng, New Ireland. This time, the submarine's radar detector worked, giving just enough warning for an emergency dive. The submarine's lookout spotted the aircraft at almost the same moment the radar detector alarm sounded, and she quickly submerged before the destroyer escorts could close to gun range. Once submerged, RO-104's captain employed every evasion technique he knew, a desperate, valiant fight for survival. Rabi made the first attack run, but RO-104 had seemingly learned from the fate of her sisters. In addition to violent evasive maneuvers, the submarine employed a sophisticated countermeasure, transmitting bursts of tuned sound impulses designed to jam Rabi's sonar. This technique, known as acoustic deception, had been developed by Japanese submariners as a last-ditch defense against sonar-guided attacks, a desperate attempt to blind their attackers. The tactic worked. Rabi made 4 hedgehog attacks over the course of 2 frustrating hours, all of which missed. George then took over the attack, her crew determined to succeed where Rabi had failed. The destroyer Escort made 5 more hedgehog runs against the elusive submarine. Despite the crew's best efforts and increasingly accurate attacks, all 5 salvos missed as RO-104 twisted and turned beneath the waves, a silent ghost in the deep. The submarine's captain was fighting for his crew's lives with exceptional skill and determination, but he was only delaying the inevitable. Each evasion maneuver consumed precious battery power, and the submarine's air was growing foul with carbon dioxide as the life support systems struggled to keep up. Finally, at Aero 819, England moved in for her turn. Her first hedgehog attack missed, but England's sonar team had been carefully observing RO-104's evasion patterns for over 2 excruciating hours. They noticed subtle, exploitable tendencies. The submarine tended to turn to starboard while diving, preferred depths between 200 and 250 feet, and accelerated just before making major course changes. They were building a profile of their prey, dissecting its habits. On the second attack, England's team had precisely calculated RO-104's next move, a chilling prediction of doom. Between 10 and 12 projectiles found their mark, and the resulting underwater explosion was followed by the unmistakable, horrifying sounds of a submarine breaking up, the screech of tearing metal, the thunder of imploding compartments as the pressure hull collapsed, and then a profound, chilling silence. It wasn't until 10:45 that debris finally reached the surface, confirming that RO-104 and all 58 hands had been lost. The debris field was extensive: wooden decking, cork insulation, clothing, and the ubiquitous oil slick that had become the signature of a submarine's grave. Among the debris was a life ring with Japanese characters, providing definitive, stark proof of the kill. The deadly efficiency of the hunter-killer group was becoming terrifyingly apparent. In just 4 days, they had sunk 3 Japanese submarines, a grim tally. But the relentless hunt was far from over. The very next day, May 24th, brought yet another contact and another kill. RO-116 was a relatively new boat, on only her second war patrol under the command of Lieutenant Commander Shibuya Kuno. The submarine had been commissioned just 6 months earlier, and her crew, many recent graduates of the submarine school at Kure, were still gaining experience. They were young men who had joined the Navy filled with dreams of glory, but were now facing the harsh, unforgiving reality of a war Japan was demonstrably losing. At Eros 1 20 hours, George gained radar contact at the remarkable range of 17,000 yards, nearly 10 miles, approximately 225 nautical miles north-northwest of Kavieng. This exceptional detection range was attributed to ideal atmospheric conditions that enhanced radar propagation, a stroke of Allied luck. RO-116 dove immediately, but her crash dive was slower than it should have been, a telltale sign of her crew's relative inexperience under pressure. At ERO 150, George gained sonar contact at just 750 yards. The submarine employed the same desperate tactics as her predecessors: violent rudder shifts, radical depth changes, and sophisticated sonar jamming. These tactics proved temporarily successful, frustrating George's attacks. The destroyer Escort made multiple runs, but each time RO-116 managed to evade at the last moment, a desperate, tiring fight. England moved in and made 2 aborted hedgehog runs when the targeting solution fell apart at the last moment. A testament to the submarine's tenacious, if unpolished, evasion. The submarine was fighting hard, but her crew's inexperience was beginning to show. Their evasion patterns were becoming predictable, and they were slow to respond to the attacking ship's maneuvers, a fatal flaw when facing such a relentless hunter. But on the 3rd attempt, England's crew had RO-116's number. At 0214, at least 3 projectiles struck home. The submarine's destruction was swift, but oddly quiet. There were none of the massive secondary explosions that had marked previous kills. This suggested that RO-116's torpedoes had not detonated, possibly because the hits were in areas away from the torpedo room, or because safety procedures had prevented sympathetic detonations. RO-116 simply broke apart and sank, taking all 56 hands with her into the crushing depths. 2 days later, on May 26th, the hunter-killer group found RO-108, commanded by Lieutenant Owari Konichi. This submarine had already proven herself dangerous to American forces. On October 3, 1943, RO-108 had fired a spread of 4 torpedoes at 3 American destroyers that presented an overlapping target in Huon Gulf off New Guinea. It had been a textbook attack, a moment of fleeting Japanese tactical superiority. RO-108 had detected the destroyers by their sonar pinging, maneuvered into perfect position, and fired a spread that gave maximum probability of hits. USS Smith detected the torpedo wakes and successfully evaded, her captain ordering emergency speed and full rudder to comb the wakes, a dramatic, life-saving maneuver. But USS Henley was not so fortunate. 2 torpedoes struck her port side amidships in the No. 1 fire room, breaking the destroyer's keel. The hits were devastating. The explosion ruptured fuel tanks, started massive flooding, and utterly broke the ship's back. Henley broke in 2 and sank rapidly, killing 15 men and wounding 52 others. Smith and USS Reed counterattacked, dropping depth charges, but RO-108 escaped, diving deep and running silent while the Americans dropped depth charges in her wake, a testament to her commander's skill. Later, on December 17, 1943, RO-108 was caught on the surface by a PBY Catalina flying boat while recharging her batteries. The aircraft's attack with depth charges caused serious damage, and the submarine went down by the stern, taking on water through damaged hull plates. But somehow, her crew managed to save her through heroic damage control efforts, working in flooded compartments to shore up bulkheads and patch leaks, a testament to their resilience and training. She returned to service after months of repairs at Truk. At 2303 hours on May 26th, Rabbi gained radar contact on RO-108 at 15,000 yards, approximately 110 nautical miles northeast of C. Adler Harbor at Manus Island. England also gained radar contact before the submarine dove. Once submerged, England gained sonar contact at 1,150 yards. The submarine was making maximum submerged speed, trying desperately to open the range before the destroyer escorts could attack. Rabbi was vectored in for the first attack, but her hedgehog salvo missed. The submarine had turned inside Rabbi's attack run, a maneuver that required precise timing and steady nerves. At 2323, England commenced her attack run. This time, there would be no prolonged hunt, no drawn-out cat-and-mouse game. England's Hedgehog scored between 4 and 6 hits on the first, devastating salvo. The multiple explosions would have torn RO-108 apart instantly. The submarine's hull, already weakened by her previous battle damage, couldn't withstand the multiple direct hits, the concentrated force of the contact explosions. RO-108 went down with all 53 hands. By now, Japanese naval intelligence was becoming deeply alarmed. On May 27, 1944, the Japanese Sixth Fleet intercepted and decoded American naval communications, which, despite American precautions, indicated that several submarines had been sunk north of the Admiralty Islands. The American reports were described by Japanese intelligence as increasingly jubilant in tone, a chilling indicator of their successes. The Japanese Radio Intelligence Service, though not as successful or comprehensive as its American counterpart, was still capable of intercepting and partially reading American communications, piecing together fragments of the Allied operational picture. Warning messages were immediately transmitted to the remaining submarines of the NA line, a desperate attempt to save what remained. The messages were sent on multiple frequencies and repeated several times to ensure reception, a clear sign of urgency. RO-112 received the warning and immediately cleared the area, recognizing the deadly danger she was in. She would survive this particular killing zone, only to be sunk by USS Batfish off Luzon on February 11, 1945, with the loss of all 61 hands, a tragic reminder of the relentless nature of the war. RO-109 also received the warning and managed to escape the immediate killing zone, though she too was living on borrowed time. She would be sunk by the destroyer transport USS Horace A. Bass off Okinawa on May 7, 1945, with all hands lost. But RO-105, under the command of Lieutenant Junichi Ino, either never received the warning or, for reasons that will forever remain unknown to history, chose to remain at her assigned position. Perhaps her radio was damaged. Perhaps atmospheric conditions prevented reception. Or perhaps her captain felt duty-bound to maintain his station regardless of the overwhelming danger. The submarine had sortied from Saipan on May 14, 1944, with the commander of Japanese Submarine Division 51, Captain Ryonosuke Kato, embarked. The presence of a division commander aboard would have added immense pressure, making it virtually impossible for Lieutenant Ino to abandon his patrol area without explicit, high-level orders, a tragic example of command rigidity overriding tactical prudence. During previous patrols, RO-105 had several close calls, proving her resilience and her crew's skill. On August 12, 1943, she had narrowly avoided 2 torpedoes fired by USS Tarpon in a stern shot through violent evasive action. The American submarine had achieved a perfect firing position, but RO-105's lookouts had spotted the torpedo wakes just in time, a moment of sheer luck and sharp vigilance. In September 1943, she had fired torpedoes at the light cruiser USS Columbia, but missed when the cruiser detected the torpedoes and expertly evaded. She had also rescued several downed Japanese aviators at various times, earning the gratitude of the Naval Air Service. Dangerous operations requiring the submarine to surface in daylight near enemy-controlled territory. After sinking RO-108, the 3 destroyer escorts, their magazines heavily depleted of Hedgehog projectiles, proceeded to Seidler Harbor at Manus in the Admiralty Islands. There, They quickly reloaded ammunition and supplies. The replenishment was conducted with impalpable urgency. Everyone knew there were still enemy submarines out there, and every hour spent in port was an hour the submarines could use to escape or attack American forces. Upon departing, they joined a larger hunter-killer task group that had arrived in the area, centered on the escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay, and including the destroyers USS Hazelwood, USS Heerman, USS Hull, and USS McCord, plus the destroyer escort USS Spangler. The arrival of the carrier group added crucial air power to the hunt, with Hoggett Bay's aircraft able to search vast areas of ocean and vector surface ships to any submarine contacts, tightening the net. During the night of May 30th to 31st, Hazelwood gained radar contact on what would prove to be RO-105. The submarine immediately dove and commenced evasive maneuvers that would continue for the next several hours in one of the most prolonged and desperate submarine hunts of the war. RO-105's captain, facing overwhelming odds, pulled every trick in the book in his desperate fight for survival. The submarine discharged debris to create false sonar targets, released oil slicks to simulate damage, and executed maneuvers so violent that they pushed the boat's hull to its structural limits, a testament to the crew's sheer will to survive. The hunt continued through the long night, with multiple ships taking turns attacking. Hazelwood gained sonar contact and dropped conventional depth charges, the explosions sending geysers of water high into the air, but without apparent lethal effect on the submarine. The depth charges were set for various depths, trying to bracket the submarine, but RO-105, despite being hit, managed to avoid catastrophic damage. George made several hedgehog attacks and may have scored 3 hits with one salvo. Yet, incredibly, the submarine continued maneuvering and fighting. The hits would undoubtedly have caused damage and casualties aboard RO-105. But her crew managed to maintain watertight integrity and continue evading, a testament to their superb damage control training and the inherent robust construction of Japanese submarines with their multiple watertight compartments, designed to allow them to survive significant damage. As dawn broke on May 31st, Spangler and England joined the relentless attack. The sunrise revealed a calm sea, but ominously, an oil slick marked where the submarine had been hit, a grim sign of its struggle. But RO-105 was still fighting, a defiant ghost in the water. Spangler's hedgehog attack missed when the submarine made a radical turn at the last moment, a final, desperate burst of evasion. At this point, Commander Haynes, still aboard George, transmitted a message that would become part of naval legend, an expression of both frustration and grudging admiration. "Oh, hell, go ahead, England." It was a blunt acknowledgement of England's superior success rate, a tacit admission that this particular warship, with its unique crew and honed tactics, seemed to possess a preternatural ability to find and destroy its prey. England's crew, who had been watching their sister ships attack without success, were eager for their chance, a coiled spring of readiness and determination. England's attack was devastating. Her crew had been observing RO-105's evasion patterns all night, meticulously noting subtle tendencies. A slight hesitation before major turns, a preference for certain depth bands when under attack, a momentary vulnerability. They had learned, adapted, and were now ready to deliver the final blow. At 07:36, the Hedgehog salvo triggered a massive underwater explosion that dwarfed even the spectacular destruction of I-16. Between 6 and 10 projectiles found their mark, and the resulting detonations were followed by secondary explosions as RO-105's own torpedoes detonated, consuming the vessel in a cataclysmic inferno. The violence of the explosion was extraordinary. A column of water shot hundreds of feet into the air, and the shock wave could be felt through the hulls of ships miles away, a visceral, terrifying tremor. RO-105 was literally blown apart, vaporized in an instant, with Captain Cato and all 55 hands killed instantly. The oil slick that rose to the surface spread for miles, mixed with debris that included recognizable pieces of the submarine's hull, wooden decking, and personal effects of the crew. It was a grim, final reminder of the totality of destruction that modern naval warfare could inflict. The hunt, the longest and most arduous of the 6, was finally over. In just 12 harrowing days, from May 19th to May 31st, 1944, the USS England had sunk 6 Japanese submarines, a feat unparalleled in the history of anti-submarine warfare. The achievement was all the more remarkable considering that England was not a powerful, heavily armed destroyer, but a modest destroyer escort, fresh out of the shipyard and on her very first war patrol, just 5 months old. The statistics spoke volumes. Of the 7 submarines assigned to the NA line, 6 had been destroyed, with 5 of them falling directly to England's devastating Hedgehog. Only RO-109 had managed a temporary escape, and she too would meet her fate less than a year later off Okinawa. The profound impact of England's success rippled far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Upon learning of the achievement, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King, a man known for his taciturn nature, sent a message that carried the weight of both profound recognition and a promise. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The message was a direct acknowledgement of the ship's unprecedented achievement and a deeply personal tribute to Ensign John C. England, whose heroic sacrifice at Pearl Harbor had unknowingly inspired the very crew who now carried his name to glory. The crew of England was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 destroyer escort crews in World War II to receive this exceptionally rare and prestigious honor. The citation read, in part, "For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines in the Pacific War area from May 19th to 31st, 1944. The USS England's brilliant performance in this vital mission contributed materially to the successful operations of our forces and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross for his exceptional leadership during the submarine killing spree. Many historians have noted that his executive officer, Lieutenant John A. Williamson, deserved equal credit for the ship's remarkable tactical proficiency. Williamson had been the one tirelessly conducting endless drills, refining attack procedures, and maintaining the crew's razor-sharp edge during long, often monotonous months of routine patrols. His quiet, foundational contribution to England's success would be fittingly recognized when he later assumed command of the ship. The strategic implications of England's rampage were even more significant than the Navy leadership initially realized. The loss of the NA line submarines, so swift and devastating, initially convinced Japanese naval commanders that a large American force had already passed through the area, en route to the Western Carolines or Western New Guinea, rather than the actual target, the Mariana Islands. This critical misinterpretation caused Admiral Toyota to delay and misdirect the execution of Operation A-Go, his desperate counteroffensive. Japanese fleet units wasted precious fuel and time moving to the wrong positions, and by the time they realized their grievous error and repositioned to defend the Marianas, it was tragically too late. The American invasion of Saipan began on June 15, 1944, catching the Japanese fleet disastrously out of position, disorganized, and strategically compromised. The resulting Battle of the Philippine Sea, fought on June 19th and 20th, 1944, saw the utter destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. In what American pilots famously called the Marianas Turkey Shoot, over 400 Japanese aircraft were shot down against minimal American losses, a staggering, lopsided victory. 3 Japanese carriers were sunk, and the long-held myth of Japanese naval aviation superiority was permanently shattered, never to recover. The loss of the Marianas also brought American B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands, effectively sealing Japan's fate and shortening the war. Although the U.S. Navy diligently attempted to keep England's unparalleled success secret, primarily to protect the invaluable source of the intelligence that had made it possible, Japanese naval intelligence, with their own cryptanalysis efforts, correctly deduced that the sudden concentrated loss of their submarines was directly attributable to American radio intelligence. Internal Japanese reports, despite the widespread denial within the high command, acknowledged that their codes had been compromised. Yet, incredibly, they persisted in believing that their main naval codes remained secure, a dangerous delusion. This tragic denial would cost them dearly in the remaining year of the war, as American code breakers continued to read Japanese messages, directing American forces to intercept Japanese ships and submarines with devastating precision. The story of the USS England ultimately transcends its specific historical moment. It becomes a timeless, universal testament to human ingenuity, to the boundless depths of courage, and to unyielding determination in the face of mortal danger. It reminds us that in the darkest hours of conflict, when nations clash and the fate of millions hangs precariously in the balance, ordinary people can rise to meet the most extraordinary challenges. In doing so, they not only change the course of history, but also indelibly write their names in its enduring annals. The crew of the USS England, a diverse group of young men, some veterans, some barely out of school, did exactly that in May 1944. Their achievement serves as a powerful illustration of the synergy between cutting-edge technology, brilliant intelligence, and the indomitable human spirit. Lessons and takeaways. What can we, in the modern era, glean from this incredible saga of the USS England? Firstly, it's a profound testament to our power of intelligence. This wasn't merely about having better weapons. It was about knowing where to use them, knowing the enemy's plans before they unfolded. The silent, tireless work of cryptanalysts in their windowless rooms was as critical, if not more so, than the valor of the sailors at sea. In today's world, where information warfare, cyber espionage, and advanced analytics dominate, the story of Fupak reminds us that the ability to understand and predict an adversary's intentions remains paramount. The battles of today are often won or lost not on physical battlefields, but in the unseen realm of data and algorithms. Secondly, the story highlights the critical role of innovation and adaptation. The Hedgehog wasn't just a new weapon. It was a reimagining of anti-submarine warfare, solving fundamental problems that had plagued naval strategists for decades. It reminds us that victory often goes not to those with the most resources, but to those who can most effectively innovate and adapt their tactics to new technologies. The continuous evolution of military hardware, driven by battlefield needs, is a timeless lesson. Thirdly, it underscores the human element as the ultimate force multiplier. While technology and intelligence provided the tools, it was the courage, skill, and sheer persistence of the crews, from the sonar operators straining for a faint ping, to the plotting teams making split-second calculations, to Lieutenant Commander Pendleton's unyielding tactical leadership, that delivered the kills. The story of Ensign John C. England, whose selfless sacrifice imbued his ship with a profound sense of duty, reminds us that behind every statistic, every tactical victory, are individual lives, individual acts of heroism, and immense personal sacrifices. The valor and resilience of both the American and, indeed, the Japanese crews, fighting bravely for their respective causes, paints a picture of the human spirit pushed to its absolute limits. Finally, the saga of the USS England is a powerful reminder of how seemingly small, localized actions can have monumental strategic consequences. The sinking of 6 submarines in the middle of the Pacific, while an incredible tactical victory, cascaded into a strategic advantage that fundamentally altered the course of a major fleet engagement, contributing directly to the devastating Japanese defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. It illustrates the interconnectedness of warfare, where every tactical victory or failure can send ripples across the entire theater of war, shaping the grand narrative of history. The USS England's unprecedented achievement in May 1944 stands as a timeless testament to these truths. It's a story of steel and sacrifice, of hidden intelligence and overt bravery, and of how, even in the most brutal conflicts, the convergence of human brilliance and unyielding spirit can achieve the truly extraordinary. Its legacy is not just etched in the hull of a ship, but in the very fabric of naval history, a beacon of what can be achieved when purpose, preparation, and profound courage align against the odds.